Welcome to Exploring A Course in Miracles. I'm Emily Perry with the Circle of Atonement, here with Circle founder Robert Perry. And we have a great topic for you today because in this episode, we are going to be discussing how to practice A Course in Miracles. The Course tells us very clearly what it is that we are supposed to do on this path. It's got its own very sophisticated system of practice. It is incredibly rich, it's detailed, it's wise, it is practical, and it is complete enough to bring about the aim of the course, which is the transformation of our mind from a thought system rooted in fear to a thought system rooted in love. And this is not, however, the concept that many course students tend to carry, but it's not because it isn't a concept found all throughout the course. The course is very well accustomed to our complaints saying that it doesn't tell us what to do when it says in chapter 11, quote, "You may complain that this course is not sufficiently specific for you to understand it and use it, yet it has been very specific and you have not done what it specifically advocates." So our structure for this episode is to share what we're calling the keystone diagram, which is a very simple summary of the course's teaching on how to spend our days. We'll be showing the diagram here in the video recording. So if you're watching on YouTube, you'll see it, and we'll be sure to include a link to it in the description. If you're listening to this on a podcast, we'll also be sure to share the keystone diagram in the show notes, which you can find at circleofa.org/podcast. I should say here at the beginning that everything that we are sharing, as always, is straight from the course itself. This is not our opinion on what it is that you should be doing each day. This is what the course itself tells us to do. If you've ever wondered what Robert and I do each day as students of this path, this is it. We are not perfect by any stretch, but this is the template that we follow. And it's what we teach extensively in our Course Companions program here at the Circle. The course has an absolute wealth of information on how to live it each day. Everything we need to know is right in the book itself. And so, Robert, before we get into the keystone diagram, you and I have taken to calling the course a path for life. Again, to completely transform a human being requires an entire system of practices, which the course has. So before we drill down into the specifics of what to do each day, let's talk about the big picture of what the course has to offer us as a path for our entire life.
Well, I think that in contemporary culture, we don't particularly want a system of practice. We tend to want one thing, right? So we've boiled Buddhism and mindfulness down to meditation. With the Course, we tend to boil it down to something like, well, it's just forgiveness, or it's just looking at your ego with Jesus without judgment. And we like that idea of something simple, it's one pointed, but you don't transform a human being. You don't transform a whole mind through one thing. You need an integrated system of practices. There's a guy named John Vervaeke, who's director of, I think, cognitive sciences at University in Toronto. And he likes to call it an ecology of practices. And he directly criticizes this idea that you can do it all through just seated meditation. You can accomplish all the goals of spiritual traditions through sitting down and meditating. You need a lot more than that. And that's why, with Buddhism, you have the Eightfold Path. And the Course has something similar in a fundamental recognition of the fact that we need different components that target different things and that all work together towards the one goal of what the course calls salvation, what you might think of as the transformation of your mind.
A million years ago, before I was teaching the course, when I was teaching mindfulness, this was the very complaint because mindfulness was on this rapid ascent to adoption in our culture. And those who had been steeped in the deep well of Buddhism and all the practices there called it mindfulness, where it's like
Mindfulness, that's
yeah,
good.
like you just take something that has this whole tradition behind it and think that you can teach someone in 8 weeks what it's all about. And yet that's what we want in this culture. We want the simple fix, the quick solution. You hear all the time that the course either doesn't tell us what to do or the course repeats itself again and again. It's just about forgiveness. And both of those things kind of turn it into a course, right? Like it's taking this whole rich
Yeah.
thing and
Miracles.
miracles. Yeah. And I don't want to belabor this, but historically, students have not fully understood the degree to which not only is the practice a factor in the course's path, but the degree to which the course spells out how we do its practice. And this is partly because so much of the material around those ideas related to the practice was removed in the original publication of the course right before the day before the course started coming through. Course scribe Helen Schuckman got a meditation instruction. This is Here I Am, Lord, that was restored in the complete and annotated edition of the course that we publish. There's a whole correction formula for fear that is a practice in the early chapters. There's a beautiful prayer that we say to Jesus that's been restored in chapter 2, the one that begins with, I'd like to pray that my will be united with thine. There's a prayer to Jesus in chapter 3. Help me see my brothers as he really is. All of the instructions, many of the instructions about review periods are gone in the first chapters of the text. Most of the references to the concept of the importance of study and careful interpretation were removed. So if all of that is stripped out, then it's kind of no wonder that we've been so confused as students on what to do.
And the whole idea of miracles as expressions of love to other people that should be guided by Jesus. We're told how to express that love, how it can be most helpfully received by them. That's also been massively edited, removed, changed. On the other, so all of that is true. Additionally, though, we've managed to ignore a whole workbook that every course student has in their possession. So we have some kind of phenomenal ability to overlook the practical instruction of the course. I think the editing definitely contributed. I think we haven't gotten good teaching in the course community about this element of the course. And as a result of all of that, including our ability to just not notice stuff we don't want to see, um, has contributed to the fact that we approach and relate to the course as a teaching, which it is, but it never calls itself that. I've never found a place. It always calls itself a course. And a course is something that takes you through an educational process where you end up having acquired something. In the course's case, we know what that is. You can call it salvation, you can call it enlightenment, whatever you want to call it. The course is claiming that it's an actual course that takes us through a process. And so we've lost something that is at the very center of its nature. This idea of what, I often think of as the course as a path. And a path has teachings to study, but it has practices that you're meant to do. It has a way that you live differently in the world. You behave differently. You show up differently. that whole element is not like a side thing in the course. It's part of its very identity, and we just lost that whole thing.
Well, it's called A Course in Miracles. And you and I say all the time that the course has set itself in an educational model versus a religious one. And you can see throughout, if you take it seriously in that educational structure, it's trying to lead you somewhere like an educational structure would. The other thing I want to say is that I agree with you that we can't put too much. We can put some of the issues around this on the editing, but there's been a workbook with A Course in Miracles since day one. That did not escape the editing process. And there's so much in the workbook that tells you specifically what to do. And we, as a community, have pretty wholesale ignored that. So we'll get into all of that as we go
Can I
through this
add one more
discussion.
thing?
Yeah, go ahead.
Okay. One day we probably should do a podcast on, there's a pretty brief recording of Helen and Bill and Ken Wapnick and Judy Scutch talking about the course with, I believe, a North Carolina study group way back in the day. Like this has got to be the 70s, I assume. Uh, and it's interesting to listen to that because in and amongst Helen talking about visions she had, like of the cave and the scroll, the whole bunch of them are talking about using workbook lessons, like for certain purposes. Like this is a good lesson to have for this. And it so struck me because that kind of dropped out of the vernacular. Like there's these workbook lessons, they're really potent forces and remedies for certain things going on inside of us. Somehow that just dropped out of the discourse.
I know, and you see it so much in co-scribe Bill Thetford's personal journal that he kept for a few months as the material was coming through. You can see, we've done a whole podcast on Bill's journal, but you can see him earnestly trying to apply the material practically in his everyday life. And yeah, we need to get back to that, it feels like, as a course community.
Yeah. And he's referencing the truly helpful prayer and so on. And yeah, it's like while we're talking for decades about the teachings and the separation, making of the world, we're ignoring this whole huge dimension that sits at the heart of what the Course is.
Okay, so let's get into it. Why don't you go ahead and share the keystone diagram, and we'll start at the very bottom. I don't know if you want to say anything about the line across the bottom, which is the teachings. That's the foundation of everything. It all kind of begins and ends with the teachings themselves. So why don't you say something about that?
It's good that you draw that out because from this diagram you can get the idea the teachings don't really matter. Yet most of the word count of the course obviously is teaching. The teachings are everything, and all the methods of application are just ways of applying the ideas, of enacting the ideas. So we don't want to in any way denigrate the importance of the teachings here, not at all. That's why that blue line is the foundation for the whole arch.
Yeah, everything is resting on the teachings. And the way that this diagram is structured is that it's meant to take you through a typical day as the course outlines we should spend it. And the course puts so much emphasis on starting your day in the right, what it calls set, like mindset, establishing that mindset that will see you throughout the day. And it even says in chapter 30, the proper set adopted consciously each time you wake will put you well ahead. And so, Robert, why don't you speak to just this idea that is so important in the course of starting your day with the right mindset?
This is a major emphasis. It is all throughout the workbook, of course. It's mentioned here in the text, the quote that you just read. is revisited again in the manual in section 16 of the manual. How should the teacher of God spend his day? And the notion, I mean, we're talking about how to live this path under the heading of how to spend your day, because the way you spend one day after another, and so on, is how you spend your life. So I think there's something kind of brilliant in the fact that the course has reduced this down to a structure for each day. And that structure rests, just like our blue line here, it all rests on starting your day right, which means you establish a certain mindset. And you even in the workbook, and the text mentions this too, you establish a goal for the day. And the goals are all basically the same goal, but they're kind of in the workbook, they're variations on that one goal. So one day your goal might be all that I give is given to myself, and that your goal is realizing that. Another day your goal will be something else. So you're starting the day as if it's this distinct unit in which you're going to go for salvation. And therefore you're going to give the day a certain purpose, a certain goal, and you're going to be in a certain mindset as the foundation for your day. And doing that makes a ton of difference. You are a transformed being, but you do conduct your day differently, especially if you don't just leave that behind you in the morning, but you carry it through, like we'll talk about. And so for me, the first order of business for a course student wanting to walk this path is to start the day right. And we'll talk about what that means.
I love that you said that the course really wants us to go for the goal of salvation every day. I've been struck by that too. As you go through the workbook, it's always telling you to like dedicate yourself, go for this, take it seriously. It really wants us to have an attitude, a mindset of I'm going for God today and I'm going to
Yeah.
make this day unique. Okay, so the first item on the keystone is morning study. This is foundational, obviously. It's the first thing we're meant to do after we wake up. So say more about the components of morning study.
We see how this is built into the workbook every day in the workbook for the entire year. You're reading teachings. But let's face it, the course is mostly teachings. And so the most fundamental act of being a student of this path is reading those teachings, studying those teachings. We don't like the word study. Um, there's a really great passage that we restored in the CE that talks about this. It says it would be very intelligent of you to set yourself the goal of really studying for this course. There can be no doubt of the wisdom of this decision for any student who wants to pass it. So he's really, just openly saying, if you want to pass this course, you do what any student in any course does. You really study for it. And in my mind, I used to approach the course more as like, okay, I just scoop up the ideas. I've got the ideas. And at that point, it seems like, why do you keep reading? But it's way more than first of all, we don't have the ideas. I don't think, we have a few of the ideas and mostly inaccurate at that. But there's a way in which he is trying to like rewire your mind. And if you engage with that, it makes a difference. And you have to keep engaging with it, because once you set the book down, your mind slowly starts to wire itself back the old way. And so the course talks about reading slowly. It talks about thinking about what you read. It talks about taking it personally. It talks about rereading. It talks about reviewing, setting yourself review periods, all because just a thoughtful encounter with these teachings is mind changing.
And also for anyone who's wondering, okay, well, what am I supposed to be reading during this morning study? We have at the circle a breakdown of the text, which will walk you through exactly what you're supposed to read in a 3 to 4 page schedule so that if you're in the text, you know exactly what you're supposed to be reading each morning and it's manageable. It's just a few pages. And then obviously, if you're in the workbook, there's 365 lessons in the workbook. You're meant to read one lesson per day. So that's your reading in your morning study. And it's almost silly to say that you're just going to absorb what's there and not need to go back to it again, because the course is a 2,000 page book. And so if you take a year or a year and a half and you read the text and then you go through the workbook, it's another year before you're back in the section that you read in the text. And very often you're going to think, God, I forgot that that was even there. And I've been studying the course every day since 2011, and I'm still discovering new things, quote unquote, new things that aren't necessarily new. They're just hitting me in a different way because of where I'm at in my life. And that's part of why it's a path for life, because there's so much material here that you will never get bored.
I think it's literally bottomless. I think that we are literally getting a very small percentage of a section when we read it, a small percentage of what's really there. In material I've gone over again and again. Like I always think about the section I need do nothing. It's not that many paragraphs. I think it's like 10 paragraphs in the CE. I've been over that countless times. I've written quite a few articles about it. I've taught classes on it. I taught a workshop on it. I've written commentary on it. And every single time I go through, I see a significant amount more than I saw before. The course is written in a certain way where it encodes a tremendous amount of teaching in a small space. So we're getting a fraction of what's there. Why not go back a year later and get another fraction of what's
Right,
there?
right. Okay, so let's move on from morning study to morning quiet time. And the main focus of morning quiet time is meditation. And that's not typically something that students tend to associate with the course, but again, it's all throughout. So, talk to us about what we're meant to be doing in this morning quiet time meditation.
Pattern in the workbook is you read your lesson and then you have your first practice period. And as the workbook goes on, that first practice period more and more is meditation. And again, this is not something course students are aware of. I think there's two reasons for that. One reason is that the workbook only uses the word meditation once. And we don't sufficiently engage with the practices that are in there to notice, oh, wait, he's just told me to meditate. He just hasn't used the word. It's very clear if I trotted out lesson 41 or lesson 44, a lot of the lessons, you'd be like, oh yeah,
Yeah,
that's meditation.
because he's telling you to close your eyes, focus your mind, get rid of distractions. He doesn't say meditation, but when you put all of that together, it's like, oh, wait, he's asking us to meditate.
Yeah, you're keeping your mind one pointed. You're keeping out, as you just mentioned, distracting thoughts, and you're aiming for an experience of the light in your mind, of God, of your true nature, whatever. It differs a bit from lesson to lesson. But we would recognize it as meditation, I think, if we took those instructions seriously. Another reason we don't understand that meditation is such an important part of the course, really important part of the course, is the word was removed in the early chapters of the text. And that's too bad because there was a significant amount, I mean, not a huge amount, but still a notable amount of discussion of meditation in the early chapters of the text. As you mentioned, Helen receives for Bill a meditation method focused on the line, Here I am, Lord, right before the course starts coming through. And Jesus refers back to that couple, three times in the opening chapters of the course. So that has an enduring relevance. But the word got removed and some of the discussions got removed. And the ones that remained, you don't know it's about meditation because the word's been changed. So, there's a famous line, salvation's that you're going to mention this.
Yeah, I was just going to say students tend to know that line, salvation is a collaborative venture, but in Helen's notes, it reads meditation is a collaborative venture. And when you understand what he's talking about, meditation makes so much sense there because the course speaks throughout about this is your time to be with God. So it's not just that I'm going to sit down and try and clear out the distractions of my mind and call that meditation. The very specific instructions are about your quiet time with God. It's a meeting with God. It's a collaborative venture with God. You're getting guidance in some of the workbook lessons, and so you miss something when it's salvation as a collaborative venture. When you think of meditation as a collaborative venture, it heightens your meditation because you understand, oh, I'm not in this experience alone. It's God and I in our morning meeting.
That's a really interesting kind of difference. We think of meditation as a solitary activity, and in the Course, it's more of a relational activity. God is there, the Holy Spirit's there. There are meditations in which Jesus says he will be there in a meditation. And so we need to think of it more relational. And that's just underscoring the fact that the Course has its own approach to meditation, its own instructions for meditation. And it's a shame that that's kind of dropped out of our collective awareness of the Course.
So, is there anything else that you want to say about morning quiet time before we move on? We are in this episode, we only have an hour and we're halfway through. We're not even halfway up the keystone. So, we can't dive into each thing in the instructions specifically, but we do have in Course Companions a whole workshop on meditation if you wanted to go deeper into what the Course says about that idea. Just move, and we might even have a podcast about it too. And just moving up well, actually, let me just back up. We record these podcasts live, and there's a question in the chat already about whether or not to do this in order. So some people wake up, do their morning quiet time, and then do their morning study. I bet I know the answer to this, but what would you say about the order in which you do these things?
If you're doing the workbook, that's settled for you, right? You read the teachings, and then as part of that lesson, you get instructions for your morning quiet time. So that's settled with the workbook. I think the idea is that, the sort of the paradigm is you do your study first. However, I've done it both ways because what I find is that if once I do my morning study, my mind's in gear in a way that makes it hard sometimes to meditate. And so in years past, I would do my meditation straight away and then study afterwards. So there's an argument to be made for doing it that way. I just think that the way the course is structured, especially in the workbook, you know,
Per- Personally speaking, I like this order because when you wake up and you get into your morning study, what you realize is there's just such richness that's there that your mind just can't come up with on its own. And that richness prepares you for a deeper meditation, a deeper quiet time. And that's obviously true if you're in the text and the workbook. If we're in the text, I'll often have the section sitting right in front of me as we're meditating. And sometimes I will sneak a glance at the book and it brings me right back to what it is that we've just talked about that makes for a better meditation. So
let
I
me just say
definitely.
before we go on, that the big picture, which I think people more or less get, is that when we talk about establishing a mindset for the day, meditation is a basic part of that because it establishes a mindset of peace. And if we can keep that peace throughout the day, which is a lot of the point of the subsequent practice we'll talk about, then we have a different day. So we're establishing a different state of mind here first thing in the morning that ideally can contribute to a different day.
And this tends to be where students fall off the cliff Because to the extent that we have some kind of practice with the course, and I can raise my hand on this, I did this for years before I came into the circle and really started paying attention to what was on the page. I, Students will wake up and read the lesson and then not think about it again until the next day when we get up and we read the lesson and we use it as this little burst of inspiration in our mind. And then that's kind of that until the next morning. And so the course has its own practices for how to extend the bit of light that we've gathered in our morning practice and in our morning quiet time to extend that all throughout the day. And that begins with what it calls hourly remembrances. So, talk to us about what those are.
In the workbook, after you reach a certain point, this becomes a major kind of pillar of the workbook practice, where every hour, when you can, you stop and spend a couple minutes, less if you can't spend more. There's a whole stretch in the workbook of 2.5 weeks where you go 5 minutes an hour, and that's tough for us in the middle of a busy day. And you do different things depending upon what lesson it is, but there's always a focus on your idea for the day, on repeating that. There's often a focus on meditation again. And there's an interesting pattern where you may consciously put the previous hour to bed, where you forgive the happenings of the previous hour, or where you thank God for the gifts of the previous hour. And then there's another thing where you ask for guidance for the hour to come. It's as if the hour is like a little mini day. So just like you started the day off with the right set, it's like you're starting the hour off with the right set and you're finishing the previous one in the proper way. So this is a really important part of extending that light, as you were just saying, from the morning, so that it has little renewal points during the day. Couple more things to say about this. Because this is happening in the middle of a busy day, when maybe you're at work and it's hard to withdraw, he's very aware of the need for flexibility here, where sometimes all you can do is just quickly repeat your idea for the day on the hour. You can't do anything else. And he's aware of that. Or maybe all you can do is give it a minute. And then for this same reason, there's a lot more instruction in relation to the hourly practice about what to do when you miss. So he knows you're going to miss practice periods, and there's a lot of really practical instruction about what to do when you miss.
Yeah, we'll get into that. In terms of like what specifically to do on the hour, you and I have got into a practice of thanking God for the gifts of the hour gone by, repeating our lesson or our line from the text. That's probably something that we should mention, that if you're in the workbook lesson is your line for the day that you repeat all throughout the day during your hourly remembrances and your frequent reminders, which we're going to get into in a second. So if you're in the workbook, your line's already chosen for you. If you're in the text, what we tend to do is just read through the section, pick a line that inspires us, and then that becomes the line that we practice throughout the day. And again, if you're in course companions, we've chosen the text lines for you, although it's just a suggestion, you don't have to use them. But the point is, it doesn't matter if you're in the workbook or the text, you can still apply these ideas to stretch your practice all day as we're asked. And so in the hourly remembrances, we thank God for the hour gone by, repeat the practice line, and then ask for guidance for the hour ahead. We're not perfect with that, but on a good hourly remembrance, that's what we're doing. Do you want to say more about the mechanics of the hourly remembrance?
In the workbook, and there is no reference to hourly remembrance outside the workbook. So in the workbook, you're given instructions for each day, and they're different. The course is always filling everything with variety, even though there's this basic overall structure. Um, but the biggest instruction that you have for the hourlies is the one you're talking about. That comes in lesson 153. And that instruction stays current for about 50 lessons. So that's a big stretch of the year. And you thank God for his gifts in the hour gone by. And it makes you think about what might have been his gifts in that hour. And then you ask for his guidance for the hour to come. And I find that's a really crucial part of the practice. And we'll talk about the asking for guidance coming up. And you spend some time dwelling on the idea. I like having a bit of meditation time. I like spending some time talking to Jesus about what's happening in the day or how my practice is going. There's a lot you can do in that time, especially if it gets a bit longer.
And I should be honest here that people who are listening or watching are probably getting a sense of just how much discipline the course is asking from us each day. And we haven't even got into the frequent reminders and response to temptation. So I just want to be honest and say that in a perfect day, when you have more space in your schedule, you can do these hourlies more as they're asked. We do have days, Robert and I, where we're just busier or we're preparing for something where the hour strikes and we just repeat the lesson and that's that. But if you have the time, it's a more meaningful practice, obviously, to sit and do what we've just said, thanking God, repeating, talking to Jesus, and asking for guidance for the hour ahead. Okay, so moving up the keystone to the next item, which is frequent reminders. And what this is repeating the idea 4 or 5 times an hour. Robert and I have alarms set on our phone that go off every 15 minutes. And when the alarm goes off, we'll take 20 seconds to be quiet and repeat the line. And so what else do you want to say about frequent reminders, Robert?
I think if you've done the workbook, you've noticed the instructions for this. This is a major part of the workbook, taking your idea for the day, which is the lesson title, and just repeating it. He says as often as you can. That's the most frequent thing. But then oftentimes the frequency is given. And when frequencies are given, they end up being on average about 4 or 5 times an hour. And it's a stretch for us. We don't like that kind of discipline. Um, but after all, he says this is a mind training course. Um, there's a lot of instruction about how to make these effective. I think we think I'm just doing this to like fill a quota, but he wants these things to do work. So his most common instruction is to repeat the lesson slowly. That's the only thing you do. You'll get way more out of it. It's a lot of extra instructions about, dwelling on what it means, about saying it as a declaration, saying it with quiet certainty. There's a lot of instructions. It's like you're swinging a golf club. He's very detailed about how to do these and make them effective. But if you do only one thing, it would be slowly. Okay. He says, ideally do them with eyes closed. But if you can't close your eyes, it's better to do them with eyes open than to miss the practice period. He says you can practice quite well under any circumstances if you really want to. And then again,
I just want to draw that out really quickly because that's important. You can be in a conversation with someone and be thinking, eyes open, nobody's closing their eyes and retreating to do a practice period while the other person's just standing there wondering what's going on. You can repeat the line in your mind, eyes open, in conversation. Our brains are capable of doing that. And that's a way to keep the practice going, even if you don't have time to actually be in quiet.
yeah. So his thing is a more quality practice period is eyes closed because you can focus better, less distraction. but it's way better to do a low quality eyes open one than to miss. And you can just see, I hope, the level of instruction and detail you get on this in the workbook. There are instructions for when you miss. He talks about in a few lessons, he talks about setting a frequency for yourself, deciding I will do it like we do every 15 minutes, for instance, or you can set a different frequency. But he also has instructions on what to do when you miss. And the instructions on when you miss are always some version of the same thing, which is don't feel bad, don't feel guilty. That'll just lead you to give up altogether at a certain point or give up for the day. Instead, just get back to your practice as soon as possible. Get back on your schedule. So don't worry about the past. Don't beat yourself up. But he considers an error to have lapsed. So just correct the error. That's it. And the big phrase you get about this in the course is try again.
When I was in college, I was a lot heavier as I gained the freshman 15 and then some. And what I used to do, because I knew I needed to be on a diet, but I didn't want to be on a diet, was I would intentionally blow it by waking up and eating something I knew I shouldn't have. And then I allowed myself to say, see, I blew it. And so therefore, I'll start again tomorrow or I'll start again on Monday. And
Mm-hmm.
that's what we tend to do with our course practice. There's a way of saying, I know what the course is asking me to do, but I've already blown it and it's 10 a.m. and I'm not going to get back on track. I don't want to get back on track. And so I'll start again tomorrow. And then tomorrow becomes tomorrow and tomorrow and tomorrow. And then it never quite ever gets back on track. So don't use the excuse of, I've already messed it up today to not get back on track, regardless of at what point in the day you're on.
One of the great features of the instructions for practice is that it ends up depriving us of all our excuses. He's got a way of being flexible for the day and giving us instruction about what to do when we miss practice periods and all of it, that the sum effect of it is depriving us of all excuses.
Absolutely. And I just want to say before we move on from frequent reminders that this idea of practice reps throughout the day is what changes your mind. You're not going to get there in terms of really achieving what the course is asking us to achieve if you read it for a little bit in the morning and then forget about it until the next morning and then rinse and repeat that process. You've been studying this book for 40 plus years, and we're routinely surprised that we'll be doing a workshop on a topic about guarding your mind, for instance, and then leave the workshop and then instantly be back in some egoic place. And so we've likened practice reps to exercise reps, where you use the barbell example, which I think is really great. If you see some heavy barbell in front of you and you can't lift it, well, what's your plan for being able to lift that barbell? You're going to have to get in the gym every day and do enough reps so that you gain the strength to lift that barbell. And practice reps are the same thing. If you want to change your mind, you have to do the work. You have to do the reps that allow you to do the heavy lifting of changing your mind. And you can't escape it.
I mean, if you want to learn anything, you make sure you repeat it, right? If you think you're going to learn something from not having a lot of repetition, you're kidding yourself because when you want to learn, you do engage in the repetition.
Your son is a pianist, and actually plays quite a few instruments, but I'm always routinely impressed at his dedication, where he's in an orchestra, a youth orchestra, so he has to put in this kind of work, but there's like 2 hours a night that he is spending with his music on top of his schoolwork. And I always think, gosh, what if we had that kind of dedication and discipline with our course practice where we're spending this time over and above doing our regular work to just keep up with the discipline that's required to achieve what we all say we want to achieve.
Yeah, I mean, in that
Because
context, everyone knows you practice every day or you're out of the game.
well, musicians will tell you the instrument doesn't lie. If I get on a piano and I start to play it, it's going to be awful and you will know I have not practiced. But if someone like your son gets on the piano and plays something beautiful, you're going to know all the work that was put into that to make it look easy. And the same thing is true with our mind. If you've been a course student and you are still just as triggered today as you were when you picked up the book however long ago, you're not doing the work to change your mind. It's not happening because you're not putting in the practice.
So it's like
You
the instrument here is your mind.
yeah, your attitudinal muscles aren't strong enough to do the lifting of what it takes to get to where the course is asking us to go. So I think we get the idea of frequent reminders and how important those are to our course practice every day. And then there's another step beyond that, which is response to temptation. And by the way, you can see the problems that we're having with developing our A Course in Miracles CE app and the kind of notifications that are required to do course practice as instructed throughout the day. There's just so much going on here that to have an app that incorporates all of these things has been kind of mind-blowing for all of us. But let's get into response to temptation. This is the idea that we're guarding our mind and that whenever we feel a sense of loss of peace, that we know what to do in response to that. So say more about response to temptation.
Yeah, response to temptation is where you repeat your idea for the day in order to dispel upsets. So the notion is that you're being vigilant to any kind of disturbance of your peace. And disturbance of peace takes many, many forms, and the workbook mentions many forms of this to watch out for. And then when you notice that disturbance of your peace, you're meant to immediately repeat today's idea, again, slowly. And the reward for doing that is your peace is restored. So this is a practice that is mentioned by name in the text and the workbook. And it is examples of it are found in all three volumes. You might even say this is the course's main practice if you had to pick one. And he talks about it in several places as being ideally a habit. So, lesson 95, for instance, in the workbook says, you have not yet formed the habit of using the idea as an automatic response to temptation. It's just supposed to just be a reflex where you're reaching for your idea before you even know it. So, this is a really basic part of the course that reaches into the rough and tumble of the day. This is where your course practice meets all the difficulties and challenges and completely unpredictable circumstances that you encounter in a given day.
Because we're triggered all throughout the day.
Yeah.
And it's more evidence that he's thought of everything, right?
Yeah. And this is a genuine antidote to our upsets. We probably think, well, how's this going to really solve our upsets? In my experience, this solves them better than anything. So we should take this seriously.
So often when we're triggered, what tends to happen is left to our own thought system, our mind will ruminate on all the ways that we've screwed it up or they've screwed it up or what went wrong, or we're just stuck in the little cycle of our own thoughts. And what this does is you're thinking, okay, what bit of higher wisdom, what bit of higher truth can I bring to the situation to heal it from that perspective? And it works. But it only works if you remember to do it because you're not going to want to. Um, if you haven't trained your mind to bring in the thoughts, the course's thought system when you're not triggered, you're never going to have it available to you when you are. And
Yeah.
so if you've done the hourly remembrances, if you've done the frequent reminders, the practice line should be up right there. And then when you experience that loss of peace, there it is. And you can
Yeah.
apply it. And
Yeah.
that's how the system works.
Yeah. Okay. Can we go on to asking for guidance?
Yeah.
Okay. So I just want to make sure we do have at least a tiny bit on asking for guidance and giving miracles, because these are just so important in the course. Somehow the narrative has developed, and I know you've seen it too, Emily, um, that asking for guidance is somehow like contrary to the course. And I just can't imagine anything further from what the course itself says. This is a constant theme throughout the text, throughout the workbook, and throughout the manual. And the idea is simply we don't know enough, we're not smart enough, and we're too biased to be making our own decisions. So, whenever we face a decision, the course wants us to clear our mind of our preconceptions, ask for guidance, listen openly and attentively. And what comes out of that is just better decisions. Things just go better. Um, our egos make a mess of things. We are not good at charting our way through life. We don't like the loss of control. I think we're almost thinking, you know what? If things go worse, but I stay in control, that's a bargain I'm willing to make. But it's a dumb bargain, right? What's so bad about having everything go better and you just have lost some control in the process? Like, is that so awful? Um, Another thing I think is important to mention, obviously asking for guidance is a huge topic of its own, but the last thing I want to say about it is that it is in the course not entirely, but largely framed as being about the next component of giving miracles. Like we're asking, how can I extend? You know, God is sending me people who need my help. How can I be a miracle worker in their lives? How can I help them in a way they can hear and receive?
And that's one of the reasons why the diagram is in this keystone format, where you walk up the keystone doing the things that the course has asked us to do. And then at the very, very top, the keystone itself is giving miracles. Everything is leading us to that place where our mind is in that place of love, where we are available to express love to others who need it. And as we say so often here, that's God's plan for salvation. We love each other home. And if our mind is not in a place of love, we can't express it. And so everything you do on your way up the keystone is a purification process. And hopefully, when we're called upon to express that love, the well of it is in us to give, because we can't give what we don't have.
And obviously, the course is hoping that through all of it, as you just said, the morning study, the morning quiet time, the hourly remembrance, all the practice we do during the hour, um, that enables us to be what he calls early in the text, miracle ready. Like without that, we're not ready to give love. We're not in touch with the love that's in there. And so all that practice and that study, it enables us to be in a place where someone shows up, they need our help, and we can give it. We have
Yeah.
the love, we ask what to do, how to respond to their need, and now we're miracle workers.
And when he says in the miracle principles that miracles are natural, but purification is necessary first, this is that idea.
Yeah.
And then, so we don't have the diagram up, but when you go, so the giving
I'll put it
miracles
up.
is at the top of the keystone, and then on the other side, as you move down the right side of the keystone, you're just repeating the process. So you are continuing to ask for guidance as your day goes on. You're continuing to have your response to temptation practice ready so that when you feel triggered, it's right there for you to get you out of that state of unrest and disturbance. And then you're still doing your frequent reminders, you're still doing your hourly remembrance. And then at the very, very end of the day, you have your evening quiet time. And the evening quiet time is meant to be a bookend to your morning study where you just take however long, 5, 10, 15 minutes plus, and you have another meditation. And so, Robert, do you want to say anything more about evening quiet time before we close?
The course has a big emphasis on this. The shortest formula for practice in the course is you practice the idea at the beginning of the day, all throughout the day, and at the close of the day. That's said in different ways a number of times. The notion here is that you're treating your day as a unit. And so you should start the day in a very conscious way to set the tone for that unit. And then you end the day in a very conscious way. This not only is the appropriate bookend for your day, the course also says a number of times that it sets you up for a different kind of sleep, which will then set you up for a different kind of day the next day. So the evening quiet time is looking backwards, it's closing the day right, but it's looking forwards in setting up your sleep and your following day in the right way.
It's so beautiful. And one of the reasons why you and I'll just, again, being honest, one of the reasons why we keep falling down on the evening quiet time is number one, not carving out space for it. So this is one of those things where you have to be proactive about making the time. The second thing is we when we do remember evening quiet time, it's often so close to when we're going to bed that we fall asleep in the evening quiet time,
So
and then
we're like, can we manage 10 minutes
yeah,
before
and then
falling
and then
asleep?
the alarm goes off, and we're like, oh, we just like wake up. We're like, wait, what happened? But we have stumbled upon a tip, and it's that we have a candle now that we'll use when we remember
Right.
to do our evening
Yeah.
quiet time. And there's a sacredness to lighting the candle and making evening quiet time an act of real concentrated focus and dedication to the path. And you and I keep cracking up because it's just a candle. It's not that hard, and yet it's kind of transformed everything. And so you would think that having it be darker would make us fall asleep easier, but there's just something about saying, you know what, we're going to light a candle, this is sacred, and it has really transformed that time for us. So I share that.
Even though our eyes are closed, like, what's that about?
Yeah.
Like, we can't see the candle.
There's something about the candle that has made the space sacred, and it is what it
Yeah.
is. We're
Yeah.
not
We're
slaves to
embarrassed to admit
form,
it.
but at the same time, that just being honest, that's what's happened. Now, as we close here, just again, big picture framing. If you're new to the course, or I suspect if you've been on this path for years, this is not how you're spending your day. And so really the point of this episode is let's get, as a community, let's get the concept of what it is to actually walk this path in our minds. And even if we're imperfect at it, we know what it is that we're supposed to do, and we're incrementally making steps in that direction each day. So, Robert, do you want to say anything more about this concept of practice for students of this path?
First of all, I would say, like, whatever element you can do here, if it's just one element, do it. That being said, if you're really a devoted student of the course, if you're trying to get closer and closer to its goal, I mean, change is hard for anyone. I don't care who you are, it's hard. If you really want to change your mind, then first of all, just acquire this is the concept. This is how my path is actually structured. It's a course, it's trying to guide me to an outcome. Secondly, I think then you've got to dedicate yourself to trying to enter more and more and more into this structure. This is what will work for you. This is what will change your mind. And thirdly, we got to support each other in this. I mean, if something is experienced as difficult, as something that takes a lot of discipline, it's hard enough to do it. But if you're doing it on your own without the support of others, it's way harder. So I think collectively we can help each other like get up that archway um, rather than right now giving each other cover for just ignoring the whole thing.
Community support is so important, and it it's nice to be in community with students who are on this path, so that if you are experiencing that loss of peace, if you are triggered by something, your fellow student is saying to you, hey, what's your line for today? And you might not have even thought of that yourself, but the fact that they're saying it to you, it's like, oh yeah. And that's one of the real benefits of shared language and a shared path that we can all have together. So someone just commented in the chat, I'm sorry the name flew by too quickly, but a day spent with God. And I thought that was a beautiful way to frame it. That's exactly what we were wanting to achieve in putting together this keystone. It's how do you incorporate specifically what the course tells us to do in the format of how a course student should spend their day. And that's why you see the sunrise and the sunset in it. And so we hope that this diagram has been clear. We hope this conversation has been helpful to you. And if you want to go deeper into these discussions with Robert and I and the entire Course in Miracles community that we have here at the Circle, we invite you to join us in our free community at community.circleofa.org. And if you want to go even deeper into how to live this path each day, we invite you to join our Course Companions program, where we literally walk you through every volume and every section and every lesson each day. So you can join Course Companions at coursecompanions.com. And again, you can join our free community at community.circleofa.org. On behalf of Robert and I and everyone here at the Circle, thank you so much for watching or listening, and we'll see you next time. Bye for now.